Ayo YouTube, Flowcat here, and it is time for How Do I Rosaria. She's an extremely flexible cryo unit, so I'm super excited to bring you this video. Let's get right into it. Welcome to the video. Before we dive in, I'd just like to say a few things about what this video series is and what this video series is not. In this series, I will be analyzing each unit's kit and discussing how I use them in-game. I will talk about how I like to build them, what teams I like to use them in, and mechanics that I find useful for the unit. In this series, I am not advising you to do what I do. I'm not telling you that this is the best or optimal way to play the unit. This is simply what I do, and I am sharing it in hopes that you find it useful, interesting, or entertaining. Keep this in mind during your responses in the comment section below, and as always, be respectful. Thanks! First, let's discuss her skills, and then we'll talk about what kind of roles she can play in your team compositions. Her auto attack sequence says it consists of 5 strikes, but it actually totals up to 7. Her 3rd and 5th strike hit twice. Her charge attack is standard for polearm users. It's useful for piercing enemies and repositioning on the battlefield. Her E teleports her behind small enemies or to the front of large ones. She will then strike twice, dealing cryo damage. The second strike will deal damage in a small AoE around Rosaria. Her Q also strikes twice, once with her weapon, and then she will summon an Ice Lance and kick it down onto the ground, dealing a large instance of AoE cryo damage. Every couple of seconds, the Lance will deal an AoE blast of cryo damage. This has an 8-second duration, a 15-second cooldown, and an energy cost of 60. Her Ascension talent passives work in tandem. The first gives her a 12% crit rate buff for 5 seconds so long as she strikes the back of an enemy with her E. The second passive snapshots her current crit rate at the time of casting her burst, including the crit rate from her first talent passive, and grants all party members except Rosaria 15% of her crit rate for 10 seconds. This buff maxes out at 15%. What this means is that using her first passive, you can build her up to 88% crit rate, and then you can snapshot the first passive with the second passive, passing on a 15% crit rate buff to all party members. It is important to note that other sources of crit boosting, such as Hu Tao's talent passive, will also snapshot into the crit buff. But Cryo Resonance and Blizzard Strayer do not actually buff your crit rate stat and therefore do not work for these talent passives. Based on her skills and passives, it is clear to me that her primary role is as a burst DPS. You swap in, use her EQ combo, and then swap out for consistent cryo application, as well as a nice crit rate buff for your team. This makes Rosaria extremely useful for permafreeze teams, allowing you to allocate more resources into crit damage, and it also makes her extremely useful for Superconduct teams for the very same reasons: consistent application, damage, and buffs. Secondarily, using Chongyun for cryo, and maybe Yunjin and Superconduct for Fizz, you can run Rosaria as a main DPS. Note that this is a secondary function of her kit and will require more support from other units to make it viable. So now let's move into the investment section and I'll show you what my Rosaria looks like. I have her at level 85 out of 90, and these are her stats. Her talents are at 8, 11, 12, and I'm running her on a Skyward Spine, R3. Rosaria has a lot of other great weapon options. The Ketch is a fantastic weapon for obvious reasons. The Kitane Cross can be extremely useful in reverse melt teams with Rosaria. And the Favonius Lance can be really useful if you need a little bit of extra energy generation for your team, although it will lower her damage a little bit. I'm running my Rosaria on a 4-piece Noblesse. You can also run her on a 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, or a 2-piece Blizzard Strayer, 2-piece Noblesse. You could even run her on a Fizz damage set if you're considering running her as a Fizz main DPS. So now we're going to move into the team building section. Because my Rosaria is built as a burst DPS / support, that's how I'm going to showcase her in these team compositions. I feel like showing her as a main DPS without building her as one is not going to give you all a very good impression. That being said, I do have some pretty unique teams that I want to show you all, so let's get right into it. First up is a team that I've actually shown prior in my How Do I Sara showcase. You'll remember that this is a Superconduct team using C6 Rosaria to boost the clam damage from Kokomi. This team is great because it has multiple sources of elemental damage as well as Fizz damage. Let's look at the showcase. Next up is Barbara, Xinchu, Rosaria, and Ayaka. This is a double Hydro, double Cryo Permafreeze team. Using Barbara on Thrilling Tales gives Xinchu a nice Hydro damage buff as well as a huge attack buff. And then Rosaria provides the consistent Cryo application as well as Fizz Shred with her C6 for Barbara's Clam set, as well as a crit rate buff for everyone in the team, as well as an attack buff from the 4-piece Noblesse set. Ayaka's there to do big damage. Let's get right into the showcase. And lastly, I have a very interesting team for you all. This is Raiden Shogun, Sara, Rosaria, and Chi-Chi. Now you may be wondering how this team will actually work, but you'll see that even though my Chi-Chi is rather underbuilt, she runs perfectly well as a Fizz driver and healer in this team comp. And then I can use Raiden Shogun in the downtime to charge up everyone's bursts. Really excited to show you this one. And now we're going to move briefly into the mechanics section before I jump into the constellations. For mechanics, there's really not that much you need to consider with Rosaria, except for the fact that you want to make sure you're striking the back of an enemy. I've got a quick clip that I'm going to show for you all while I'm chatting with you that shows Rosaria's crit rate buff taking effect, and then it also not taking effect. All this really means is that for larger enemies, you may have to run behind them before you cast her E. And now we're going to jump into the constellations. Rosaria's C1 gives her a 10% normal attack speed and normal attack damage bonus for 4 seconds every time she crits. Her C2 increases the duration of her ult by 4 seconds. Her C4 regenerates 5 energy so long as her E crits at least once. And her C6 causes her burst to shred enemies' physical resistance by 20% for 10 seconds. I wouldn't really say her constellations are necessary, but probably the biggest difference you'll notice is with her C2 because it's a 50% duration increase on her burst. And yeah, that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, I appreciate it. I hope you learned something about Rosaria or how you might want to use her in your teams. Let me know in the comments section down below what you like to use Rosaria for in your team compositions. Drop a like on this video, subscribe if you're new, and hey, I've got a link to my Discord in the description of my videos. You might want to check that out. We've got a really active, friendly community. I'd love to welcome you there. And as always, stay healthy, stay hydrated. Peace, everybody.